welcome to the Sin Press YouTube channel. My name is Mbali Mbata. Today we are joined by Khaya Dlanga. We're going to be discussing his latest offering, Life is Like That Sometimes, which is about loss. Mainly, it's about a lot of other things, a lot of stories from Khaya's childhood and some stories from adulthood, which I would love to discuss, but I can't because there's a particular organ that's described as ugly. Anyway. Before we actually get to the book, let's get the Helen's Illiterate out of the way.
Yes.
So, I saw the original tweet.
How did I know?
It has to be done. It has to be done. And you know, Nick, I was thinking, people are gonna see this and be like, yeah, she opted in because of the no.
Shame. To be fair, this was organized weeks ago.
Where did it go? So anyhow, as a successful young black man, I don't think that within a Johannesburg context, you would live in Tembisa, Diepsloot, Alex and places like that. In the same context that I don't think in Cape Town you would necessarily live in like Mitchell's Plain or Nyanga, for example.
I've lived in Cape Town.
Yeah. I think the book you mentioned, Pinelands.
Yes.
Which is definitely a far stretch from like Diepsloot, for example.
Yes.
So, as a black South African, who a lot of us would obviously live in the other areas and not your Pinelands and the other kind of fancier parts of Cape Town, what reason is there for black South Africans to not believe that the areas of Johannesburg that are the equivalent of the areas in Cape Town that are neglected are not going to be equally neglected?
I think it's the same question people would have of the ANC, for example, because those areas are just as neglected, if not even worse. So for me, I find it quite, like outrageous or horrendous that you'd have a black government that claims to be pro-poor, pro-black people, and then these areas are, some of them, in some cases, are pretty bad. And I think when you're looking at I keep saying this, and for me, part of it was like to raise a question that we have to raise and to talk about. And I remember people like raising like a storm like a few years ago when, not even a few years ago, last year, when it was said that, guys, the ANC is going to go below 50%.
And it did.
Pandemonium broke because people refused to accept that was going to happen.
They were threatening a re-election.
And so now, and what I'm saying is, we've got to accept that is a possibility. And for me, and part of my reasoning, I was not saying that, yes, I want it to happen. I'm saying that there is a reasoning that people have. Because the feeling is that, we've given these guys a chance for so long, and the numbers have been declining over a very long period of time. And people kind of feel like maybe it's time that we try somebody else. And unfortunately, I think that the ANC doesn't have a leg to stand on right now, and people are going to try other alternatives. And I think that if you're looking at the big name that she has, you can't argue the fact that she's got a big name, right? So who could the ANC possibly field, to fight her? Who could actually say field possibly, to fight her? And I think that those are some of the facts that in my mind I was thinking about. Who could? And I've been asking people, no one has been able to give me an answer.
Well, I also am not getting my answer to why, as a black South African, I would not be worried about the DA neglecting the black areas as much as the ANC has. But anyhow, another discussion for another day. Let's get to the book before Mahlati gets mad that I'm running out of time. I am not going to start in the beginning because there's a part in the middle of the book that I feel we need to unpack. I'm going to read through here. The chapter that I am reading at is Leaving Home and Living with My Uncle. So the part that I'm going to read goes such. Of course, I was no stranger to moving around, but I was a bit older now and had just begun to settle into living with my mother and siblings, a family unit I hadn't really experienced before. We had spent so little time together as a proper family that we were still figuring out who we were to each other. In Tukini, the village where Khaya grew up, my mother had left when I was 3, and I lived with my grandparents and little sister. Then came boarding school, followed up by a brief 3-year stint living with everyone as a family. Just as I was adjusting to that dynamic, I moved to live with Uncle Vosumzi. My later childhood years resembled a nomadic experience, a constant shifting of homes and relationships, where belonging felt less like a solid foundation and more like sitting on the hard benches at home affairs, shuffling up one spot at a time until it was finally your turn to talk to an official. Khaya, why I wanted to start with this part of the book, ne? Recently, there have been a lot of studies that have been done where it's been revealed that a lot of black kids don't grow up necessarily with their biological parents or maybe with one of the biological parents. And for me, that feels a little bit disingenuous because for those of us, like you and I, who were born in the 80s, and our siblings and cousins who were born in the 90s, this was our reality. It's my lived reality, it's your lived reality according to your book. Everybody in the 80s who was born in the 80s and 90s, you either had a cousin, you had a friend, you had a schoolmate. Everybody was someone or knew someone. What is your thought on how people are just acting like this is a new phenomenon?
I think, I mean, I don't know what it's like now, but I know that in my time, when I was growing up, and there was still like a proper family structure. And I think because I grew up Eastern Cape, so I don't know what that, like living in Joburg was like growing up as a child. And so when I said the family structure was that initially, obviously, with my grandparents, and everybody was still came, we're all together, we prayed together, we had...
You were still a family, even though you were not necessarily your biological parents.
Yes.
I get you.
And then, of course, then I had to move and live with my mother. And I think that a lot of my upbringing and traditions were already implanted in me as a person by the grandparents. So then by the time I kind of go to live with my mother, then I have this, I'd say these building blocks that have already been built, I think, by the grandparents. And I think one of the challenges I think we have now is the breaking, when I say the way the family unit is set up is that a lot of us don't have, I don't know if it's true actually, I'm making this up I think, is that how close people are to their grandparents. Because people live very far from their grandparents
for work purposes. Like that, yeah.
So it makes it really difficult to kind of create that semblance of family structure that I think was that even if your parents worked somewhere else, you had two parents who were looking after you
even though they were not mom and dad.
Even though they were not mom and dad. And so I think that there is just a difference in how that then kind of represents itself now than it did back then.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. Let me see where to go. Oh, actually, there is a chapter where, let me find it, the suicide teacher.
God.
Oh, where is the suicide teacher? You even remember his name?
I shouldn't say it. Because I don't mention his name in the
book. You don't mention his name in the book.
Yeah.
You actually don't mention his name in the book. He's just known as the teacher. And you actually say later on in one of the later chapters, Uguti, it's not that you necessarily blame him for what would subsequently happen to your brother. Oh, I actually laughed at the part where the whole school said, if you act like pigs, I'll treat you like pigs. It almost sounded rehearsed, right?
I know. Because we heard him say that so many times at assembly. If you act like pigs, I'll treat you like pigs. And that was so funny.
How did you guys get it right, though, that on that one particular day, you all decided?
I don't even know. I think well, maybe I imagine people was like, he's going to say it again, he's going to say it again. and then he did it.
Okay. I had a maths teacher, Mr. Stradom, who liked to say, put down your pens and pencils. The funniest thing happened once. He was explaining a sum. Do not ask me what the sum was. Maths never liked me. I tried to like maths, maths didn't like me. So he's explaining that when the sum gets to a certain point, you can immediately say that x is equal to y. So he goes, when the sum is like this, you can immediately say, put down your pens and pens.
Straight up. Why are teachers like that? Because I even had a teacher who was like, but this is in primary school. So we should walk. So like we had like just standard 4 and standard 5. So I was in standard 5 and
that's grade 6 and 7 for the 2000s.
So she'd come in. So we'd hear her sometimes. Maybe there's the teacher in my class. would hear admonishing.
Is that the
other
arts
class.
teacher with
No,
the
this,
clock?
This
Okay.
is another teacher.
This is another
teacher. She'd walk in, she'd shout the class, shout at the class that was making a noise. She'd say, standard fives! But those were standard fours. And then say, fours, miss! And then she'd do the same thing to us.
To the
She'd say,
applicants.
standard fours!
And
We'd
you're
say,
like,
fives,
fives,
miss! And she can't even be mad anymore.
Sure. But we tortured teachers, eh?
Oh, we did.
We tortured teachers.
Did.
But anyhow, the reason why I wanted to speak about the suicide chapter, I made some notes for myself here. It took me back to the chapter where you were flying 3 words out of your own hand.
Yes.
And you speak in the book about how even as the blood oozed out, there was no time for crying, there was no time for medical attention.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, these 2 chapters, especially where you are removing your words and just moving on with your life immediately as the blood is oozing out of your hand, it evidences how there are a lot of pains that we as the Black community, in your own words, we swallow whole, right? So to this I want to ask, if we are not talking about things as Black people and dedicating the time really to nurse our wounds, when you as Khaya speak of healing in your book, what does healing look like for you? Maybe essentially, in your opinion, because it obviously looks different for everybody else.
Yeah.
But as a generation, as a community that doesn't necessarily take the time to heal our wounds, what would you say healing means for the Black community?
You know, it's so funny because I think part of healing is confronting the issue, talking about it. And I feel a lot of the time we really don't talk about the things that we
swallow it up.
Yeah, we do. We're just like, okay, there we go, that was fine, now let me go ahead. But those things have a way of catching up with you, like in very different ways, like in ways that we don't expect or know, right, or anticipate. And it's either, in some ways, it is maybe if you have children, how you bring pain on your children because you didn't deal with certain things. So I think for me, it's really dealing and talking about very uncomfortable experiences that we have growing up, experiences that happen to us. And I think, I tried therapy, and I think that did a thing or two for me. And
A thing or two?
Yeah, I think they did well. Okay, one thing or two. And then when I look back at, in many ways, I do think that writing about that very painful experience of me losing my brother and my mother, that helped me in many ways, like in more ways than I think
therapy and
helped.
other,
It did, yeah, more than therapy. And in some respects, I kind of feel terrible that I know my sisters haven't had that luxury, to kind of write it down and go through it. And so I feel that they are almost, I'm maybe like 2 steps ahead of them in the grieving process, because the book helped me write and go through that thing all over again.
I can't remember the exact words that you said. Oh, you said it catches up with you. I was going to refer to this in the later part of the interview, but you've actually just brought me here. That's the thing about just storytellers. You think the conversation is going to go one way and then they just... But I want to speak about the man in the past tense, because in this chapter, unfortunately I forgot to highlight the part that I wanted to read. But essentially you speak about how your dad had passed away, and it didn't, I guess, catch up with you, as you've just said, until 2 years later, because you were too young at the time. So
people do tell me.
Yeah.
Because like no one, I think, I don't know, in most cultures.
It's the same in the Zulu culture,
Yes, exactly. So what they whispered in my ear to tell me. I imagine, I don't know, I'm guessing that happened.
I mean, you were sleeping.
Because I was sick, so I don't know. And even though I was at a funeral, as my father's funeral, I didn't know what was happening. I was just in this place and sitting next to my mother, and we by the graveyard, and she's standing there by the graveyard, and I think that, by the actual grave itself, and she's standing there, that my mom, my grandmother, and my aunt are holding her.
I just remembered something.
Yeah.
Nomvula. Sandle singing telutu swini singasazi nesizathu. Like you literally were that Sandle singing estela utuli ungasazi nesizathu. Yes.
That's exactly what it was. And it's so funny because I thought that when I saw that, because my mother was crying as the coffin was going down. I thought they were trying to push her
into the coffin.
Into
Oh,
the grave.
that's why you thought she was crying into the grave.
And then I just kind of grabbed
your mom.
And then people thought I was crying for my dad, but I was crying.
You're crying because you thought they were going to throw your mom into a hole.
Into a hole, right? Because I didn't know. So it worked like, and when I say when you talk about the men in the past tense, it's because it felt to me like I had this. They kept talking. Oh, he said he used to do this. This man, he looked like this. Oh, you look like you look like.
And in your child mind, you're like, he used to look like this, and then you think, okay, what does he look like now?
Exactly. Yes. And then over time, I realized that I put the puzzles together, and I realized this man they keep talking about, he used to be like this, always referenced in the past tense.
It's because he's not coming back.
It's because he's no longer here, and he's my father. And I didn't work this out like for a good year or two.
I think you said, actually, Khaya, hi, my name is Mbali, and you will address me as Mbali. I don't mind being called Mama Gasamu, as you said in the book. They would say, Mama Gasamu. I do not mind being called Mama Gasamu. Anybody who knows me will tell you I do not mind. But because this is for Media 24, Media 24 doesn't know Mama Gasamu. They know Mbali.
Yes.
Guys, Khaya has a name trauma. He has name trauma. He shies away from calling people by their name.
It's such a thing. It's weird, and I didn't know that I did that until people started highlighting that, that I don't call people by their names unless I want their attention. That I say, Mbali, because I really want to pay attention.
What do you normally do if we are just having a conversation and it's not necessarily a situation? How do you normally refer to people?
No, because we're talking now. We're talking, so I don't need to say
you don't
name,
need to. Okay,
because we're having a great conversation, and I don't know if I say Mbali. Like I'm already talking to you. Why am I saying Mbali?
Like when I'm talking like yo, but Khaya, I actually just remembered. Oh, you're not gonna do that.
Yeah, because I'm talking to you already, right?
Yeah.
And then and the thing is like where I grew up, like no one like my uncles we called Booty.
Yes.
Or Umalume, Umakulu, saying everybody, and then maybe like your peers. Then you'd kind of call them like when you want their attention. But they were just
all by nicknames of each other.
In fact, nicknames. That's true, nicknames, and that's what happened. Because people didn't really have names.
Disciplinary committee.
That was my uncle.
That's his uncle's nickname. That him and his cousin came to his uncle. Very mischievous.
Yeah.
Do all these ones.
Disciplinary committee. But names are very, I think, sacred. And I think that we don't realize how sacred names are anymore. And maybe in the area where I grew up, it was not like a thing. It was like, you wouldn't just say someone's name. You almost had to earn the right to say it.
Speaking of the disciplinary committee, after you got your ass whooped in the train.
Yo! Trauma.
But my question is, because you and your parents, which in this case would be your mom and your uncle, they didn't know that you were swindling them, which was more expensive, and while you're actually using the train behind their back. So after they black-sent you in the train, how did you then? How did you then make sure that they didn't find out that you were swindling them?
No, I think I told them that I was on the train. But also I was like, well, I was with my friends and we just had to take the train.
They just assumed it was the one-off thing.
Yeah. But the thing is like my mother realized, she was like, but why do I wake up an hour earlier now?
She realizes,
but there's something not right here because I'm going to school. I'm waking up a lot earlier than I used to. And then that's when she kind of realized that, okay, there's some, and then I should tell her the truth this time. So which was, so it cost me 10% of the amount of money. So I take the train, if like it takes us 50 Rand a week, it was 10 Rand for each train a week. So I was saving so much money.
Khaya is such an economist. Guys, Khaya was making money. Were you 8 or 9 in boarding school when people were paying for your pillow?
9, 10, yeah.
And then, shout out, 9-year-old Mashonisa. How are you Emma Shonisa at the age of 9? You're not even in the double digits.
No.
No.
Do you know what? Like, I scarcity. They have, in fact, there are two things. It's because Lokshini is landing, not even Lokshini, in my village. I was literally the only boy with a bicycle. Right?
Yeah. Until
and
the chain broke.
So again, I was like, you privileged. So you've got to understand that you are kind of, and that, in many ways, this is how I think about how rich people get richer, right? Because they already have the stuff, and but people don't like to admit the fact that like the reason they go ahead is because they already come from a position of privilege.
Yeah.
So for me, in the village, as the only kid with a bicycle,
that was a
and
privilege.
I know other kids want to ride a bicycle, I was like, well, you can't ride it for free.
Pay me.
And then you gotta pay me for the ride, and what does that who does that help? The privileged kid, right? And so the same thing that now when I think about in boarding school, we all had our pillars. But mine was so soft that people read, and I didn't understand. I was sleeping, I didn't use a pillow on the floor, and my mother gave me like this pillow.
So and
I was not using the pillow, and the other kids were like, "Oh my God, this pillow!" And then then they'd fight over. I was like, "I can make, you know what? In order to stop this fight from happening, whoever gets the pillow that night will have to pay me money." And that's what would happen.
I'm gonna get into something a little bit more serious. The wife beater chapter, where this guy who was abusive to his wife, it was reported to your grandfather, who was kind of the figure of authority in the entire village, really. So it was reported to your grandfather. Your grandfather managed to deal with the guy because he was like, "Oh, when we score, here's a scorer your size. Let's see if we can whoop his ass." And obviously, the wife beater is the one whose ass got blacked, and he stopped beating his wife up. But this brings me to a conversation that I'm usually having within my feminism, within my feminist circle, that when it comes to things like gender-based violence and the abuse of women and children, I think that one of the things that are not working is that women as the victims can scream, cry, beg, and cry again. But as long as the men are not calling each other out the way that your grandfather intervened, personally, I don't think that it's going to be as effective as it would be if the men themselves are calling each other out. What are your thoughts?
No, I think you're 100%. In my view, I don't think there's much of question to that point. It's that because as men are the perpetrators, then, and it's not just a matter of just calling out, and I almost feel like because if there is a sense and a feeling that if I'm a perpetrator, there won't be real consequences, or if there are consequences, they're quite minor, then there is no real, like I'll never forget someone saying this to me about, this was years ago, someone's like saying that, or their partner, or read somewhere that their partner beats them up, and that he just has these impulses and they can't control himself, and almost like making it an excuse for his behavior. And then I said, do people piss him off at work? Does he hit anybody at work? Well, no, he doesn't hit anybody. So this is a person who does have control over the impulses.
Because at work they're able
to control those impulses, but for some reason where they feel like they can domineer, whatever the case may be, So I do think that because they know that at work there would be consequences, right? And I feel that part of it is not just calling each other out, it's just that there is a feeling that there are no real repercussions. And so as long as there's that feeling, I think, and apart from the fact that like just be a decent, normal human being who's not gonna then at least if then being decent is not good enough, then there should be consequences.
I don't remember who I was having the conversation with, but we were talking about exactly this, and the guy said, well, in my case, I don't remain friends with men who abuse their wives. If one of my friends is an abuser, I just excuse myself out of the friendship. I'm like, but by excusing yourself out of the friendship, you're leaving this woman vulnerable. You haven't addressed your friend. You kind of are running away from the issue, really. You're not making sure that the abuse doesn't stop. You're just making sure that you don't become a witness.
It's such a challenging issue, I think, in society, where we will almost like where people kind of feel like ill-equipped. It's like, okay, the best thing I can do is step out. On the one hand, you're thinking that what if, and this is another issue that I didn't think about until much later in my life, where I was one of those ignorant people who would say that, like, if someone is being abused, they're reporting it. But then there's so many other things that are involved, like there is dependency, there is psychological abuse, there's all sorts of other factors. And even
when you report, there's secondary victimization.
Exactly. What the police themselves are saying, no, sort it out at home. Like, you know what I'm saying? And even there, maybe you are being ill-treated by the very same police that you're trying to report this to. So I think also, like, the whole breakdown of also Nanukta Nyamezela, you know what I'm saying? Like,
please do not Nyamezela.
Yeah. So I just think that it's very, very, very complex, and it's worrying, but we've been seeing so many horrific headlines so frequently, and every time
single day
a headline comes out, everyone's like, oh my, we all like, but then there's going to be another headline.
When was the last time that in your personal circle you spoke about Twekwe, for example?
Yeah.
You see, no, not necessarily to say that you, but I'm just putting it out there to the whole country to say, last week we were talking about Ulirato, a few weeks before that we were speaking about Twekwe, but when Ulirato's murder came along, we sort of had moved on from Ukwekwe. The same way that we moved on from Baby Bokhabo, the same way that we moved on from Uyinene, the same way that we have moved on from Francis Rasuke, from so many victims. Yeah. You actually mentioned that in the book that we have a way of normalizing things that we should not be normalizing.
Yeah, I think that we just feel, part of it I think is a sense that, like, we feel so overwhelmed. And they almost feel like, well, there's nothing I can do, and if like the justice system that I'm hoping can do something for me because I'm overwhelmed, then we just don't know what to do. You know, like, I mean, like, I don't know if it's, I mean, there's a thing that I wrote in my book, that was cut out of this book, where I talk about a neighbor when I lived in this apartment building. And I heard this screaming, and what's going on? So you know when you open your window to make sure that you can hear, am I hearing what I think I'm hearing? And then I was like, I don't know, man. Yes, it's here. So I open my door and I get out, and I can hear, it's like 2 doors down, there's someone crying. So and then I call security guys, and someone's like, and it's this number, go to them 1010, whatever the case may be. And then I'm thinking, but while I wait, there's this person.
What if they get stabbed or shot?
So and I'm terrified. Of course
you're terrified.
So now I walk to this room and I stand there, and then I knock on the door, and then there's silence.
He probably said, shut the F up.
But because I'm scared, I don't know who this person is or how big they might be. I mean,
what weapon they have.
I'm not a big guy. So I go, and it's like I quickly move back so I can stand on some steps, you know, that are close to the. And then it's this Indian guy. He's like, I'm like, what's this? So I'm like, what's going on here? And I'm like, I'm scared. I'm not gonna lie. And what's going on here? And he says, I don't know. She's just crazy. She just started throwing things, and I was like, what do you mean she's crazy? She's the one who's crying. She's the one I'm hearing screaming.
Why are you not the one crying?
Why are you not the one who's crying? And she was holding a baby.
How is she throwing things and holding the baby and they say, oh my word.
And so a few minutes, anyway, like, so the silence and security, eventually, they come long, after being there. And security says there's nothing they can do. The body corporates, like, they have to call a very specific department that deals with these kinds of things. 2 hours later, this department of security that deals with this guy arrives and knock on my door.
2 hours later.
And they ask for
multiple could have died in the 2 hour period.
And do you know the most shocking thing these people said to me? They said, we've been doing this thing for 2 years. No one has ever called us. This is the first time we've been called in 2 years. Wow. And we have found dead people. Because people don't call. People don't call. And the thing is, and so when I think about it, it's not just part of this is actually not just, I agree that men, we've got to stop, the violence, right? But also when I do think about people living in apartments, not just men who are living in apartments, the fact that nobody calls, and they've found people dead because no one has called, and yet we've all had the screams. For me, I think that is a part of a very worrying trend in society where we say that we don't want to be involved.
It's not my issue.
And then we'll hear the screaming, but then when the news comes out that someone, was screaming
we're
next door,
to be shocked.
And now we are out there protesting, but they were crying right next door.
We're very hypocritical. In my case, I actually also reported an incident where it was also 2 doors down from my apartment, strangely. The security guards specifically said, "No, my sister, that couple, we are used to them, they do this every day." That lady he locked her, he beat her up, and then he threw her out and he locked her out of the apartment. It was very cold. She also had a baby.
No.
And they literally said they're not going to do anything because they've had multiple reports about this particular couple.
It's hard. I mean, it's you see, like, that's not complicated, right, as well.
Yeah.
It does complicate it because, well, if all the neighbors say we hear this all the time, we've called security, they've stopped, and then it keeps happening, it gets hard for you to think of what to do.
What else
can I do?
Because nobody else is willing to help. I get you. I'm gonna move on. Actually, I noticed that the title of the book is exactly on page 100.
It's okay. I didn't realize what page. I didn't know what page it was on until you mentioned it.
Literally on page 100.
I know it's the last page, right? And it's the last
of a particular chapter.
Of a chapter, it's the last. Yeah.
I honestly thought it was strategic.
Wow. Oh man, I wish I lied and said yes.
Because 100 is such a specific number.
No, it was no. I was like, it would be nice to have a title on this chapter, and that was it.
Okay, so your art teacher. I'm now getting into another part of the book. The art teacher, the crush you never approached, the one who ended up dying. And then now your mom is saying, "You're moving with your aunt and uncle in Bele." And you're done. But my point is, as a teenager, as a child, you never really stood up for yourself. You never spoke to your crush until she unfortunately died. Your mom tells you to move in with your uncle. You don't protest. You don't stand up. You don't even ask questions. But then as an adult, suddenly you tell your boss to go screw herself, essentially. How did you manage to make the transition from being this teenage boy who not necessarily was always vocal, but then as an adult you are now vocal?
Well, I think that there are two things. One, I think when you grow up in a South African Xhosa black household that I come from, is that there are figures of authority, and you are supposed to respect authority, right? And so when your parents say that, okay, you're going to move in with your uncle, like, okay, they have DSTV, we don't.
They've got you.
I'm not complaining.
Wait, I actually wanted to ask, when was this? Because I know that when I was growing up, at the time, the satellites were Mnet. They were not DSTV.
No, it was Mnet.
I figured because you said GSTV because it's not gonna.
Yeah, they used to say it's satellite. Yes. Land in a satellite.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, but you said it was a GSTV satellite. But then when I was trying to rationalize
that's a good point.
I thought to myself, okay, it's probably because nobody.
Well, no one references it as satellite
anymore. No, but we don't call it Mnet anymore. Exactly. A lot of people are not gonna know what's Mnet.
And so I didn't protest that, but then there were certain things where I kind of, I did, when I think about it in school, where I still stood, I stood up for myself when some teacher kicked me out of class, but not the biology teacher.
Not the biology teacher.
There's an English teacher who kicked me out of class. There was, in another book, I wrote about a teacher who asked me, because, they'd ask us to write essays, and then to bring it back and then they mark it as homework. And I wrote this one essay, and this teacher basically, white school, 3 or 4 black kids in the class, and then she hands everybody their book, but then she hasn't given my book.
Your book.
And then I was like, Miss, where's my book? And she says, no, talk to me after the class. Now, how am I supposed to pay attention for the rest of the lesson now?
You're freaking out.
Because I'm like, why?
What did I do?
What did I do? What this woman does? So she was not my English, my original English teacher was gone for the term because she was studying whatever it was. And so with the substitute teacher for
Okay,
the
she was
term.
just a substitute teacher, okay.
And so this woman, this is like July, and this woman opens my book and says, okay, did you write this yourself? So yeah, I did. I wrote it myself. And she says, okay, what does this word mean? So I tell her, and then she goes and she points to another word. What does this word mean? And I'm like, I tell her. And then she points to another word. And then I said, it actually means, why am I the only person you're asking? You haven't asked anybody else. You haven't asked them if they wrote this themselves. You haven't asked anybody what the words mean in their essays. Why asking me? She says, no. It's just that like I don't expect you to be using. I was like, why?
Why? Because I'm black.
Why would you say that? Why would you say that? And then she says, and then I said, actually, if you'd done your homework, you'd have known that in June, I got the highest essay mark in this class for June. And
There's nothing new.
Yeah. And then I said, and do you know who marked this? It's the principal of the school.
Your superior.
And then she said, what did you get? I said, I don't know. Maybe you should do your homework. And then I just got up and I left.
But you haven't read.
I was so mad. So I think for me, there were instances where I felt maybe if I felt like a strong sense of justice, then I kind of I'd have that kind of those moments where I do stand up for myself.
Look, obviously at the time it really would have looked like she was saying all of that because you're black.
Oh, she was.
She definitely was,
Yeah.
because this was a long time ago. She definitely was. But I actually want to reference a book that I reviewed. Was it last year or the year before? I can't remember. It was written by a 14-year-old author from the Northern Cape. And Lorato edited it. And she says to me, Buddy, when I was reading that book, I had to go and do some research about this child because I was like, there is no way that a 14-year-old has got this kind of grasp. Actually, she was 14 when the book was published. I think she was between 12 and 13.
Wow.
Yeah. So
that's impressive.
And when Lerato goes back to do some background work on the child, because she was really convinced, she was like, I flagged this book because I'm like, no ways, there's an adult writing this and they are using the child's name to profit. Does she not then later find out, like you told your teacher to do her homework? That child was part of a reading club, and just like you, she was actually the top performer in the reading club. She was the top performer in terms of writing essays and orals and things like that in her school as well. The school even knew her. So then it actually was substantiated.
Yeah.
But in your case, it was different.
It was terrible.
And it's actually funny when you say that there were 3 or 4 black kids in the class, because you also mentioned in the book, Oguti, what was I going to say? Okay, I lost my train of thought. Oh, you were the first generation of black kids to go to school with white kids. I don't know what generation I am because I was born in the 80s, but after you were born. When I was in school with white kids, there was a whole lot of black kids in school.
Yeah.
I was not... I think it's fortunate that I wasn't part of the first generation, because even
I agree.
Going to school after it had been integrated and not necessarily having those experiences where the teachers were almost brazen in their racism, I unfortunately didn't experience that. But we actually did have an Afrikaans teacher, Mr. Hubert, who was actually...
Why is it was the Afrikaans teacher?
But isn't it the Africans now who are going to America?
Mm-hmm.
Anyhow, he was actually fired because, unlike your teacher whose racism was subtle, he literally varam clapped a black kid. I don't know. I honestly don't know if Bamkoshe, because genuinely the school thought Ugusi went into a wrong, or if Bamkoshe because guys, let's quickly hide the fact that I honestly I don't know. Okay. I'm not happy with you in this particular chapter where you speak about how you guys lived in the township and the white kids lived close to the school. I don't know, I feel like you are being a little bit dismissive of the fact that this was the Group Areas Act. It wasn't necessarily a choice that black people wanted to live in the township. It's literally the apartheid government that had orchestrated it in such a way that you guys lived 500 kilometers away from the school, and the white kids could just walk 2 steps and they were at school.
I think there's some things you just like. I mean, because sometimes it's like, yes, there was a
That's
point.
what it was, yeah.
There was a point. It's just that I don't have to call it explicitly and say this was the Group Areas Act that was enacted in, that's what it was. Because when I say the white kids, because it's very clear they were privileged.
Of course.
That's what it was, and that's the reason we had to wake up so early. And when I talk about my other friends who lived in a town that was even further than my town.
Yes, I think you said another 30 minutes
Another
away.
30 minutes. So that means they had to wake up even
earlier than you did.
So I was waking up at 4:30. They had to go to school.
Sure.
For them, they'll probably wake up at 4.
Or 3:30.
Or 3:30 to go to school. And by the time it's like 9, 10 o'clock, you've been up there. You are exhausted. You are exhausted. And none of the white kids have that issue. Why? Because they live right here in the neighborhood. Where to go and take a number, when I was still taking a taxi, I had to take 2 taxis, to go to school. So, and then the train, I had to wake up even earlier to catch
because the train's slower, sometimes the trains are not
working, or it's late, and but I still save money, so that was nice.
When are boys going to stop this heavy dog Jimmy train? I can't remember what you said about something about you've never seen girls doing that thing of Jimmy train.
Yeah.
And I literally said out loud, yes, because women like being alive.
No, listen, but it's exciting, you're like, when I say, can I catch the train? And then you go.
No, you guys just hate being alive.
And so what do we do is that, we know you're there, you see the train taking off, you wait, okay, let me catch up, let me run, the door is open, you run, yes, I got it, yes, I'm in.
Okay, I'm gonna ask 2 more questions because I do not want to give the whole book away, but I want to touch on the weed that you smoked. Guys, you know why I want to speak about this, ne? Because I grew up partly in KZN and partly in Soweto. And when I was in KZN, I was living in the township, but we also went to school with kids from the village, right? This is before I started going to high schools, obviously. But the thing is, as somebody who has had experience of being integrated with kids who live in the village, when I am in Joburg and I listen to people from Joburg talking about, ngifuna umfazi wasemakhaya because emakhaya 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'm just thinking to myself, you have no idea what it's like in the village.
Oh, you don't.
You smoked weed when you were 8. I know that there were girls that I went to school with that were from the village that were sexually exploited at a very young age. And people in the city, I do not know if we are not aware of this, or if we are deliberately choosing to pretend as if it doesn't happen, or maybe if people in the village just hide it well. But we are not honest as a country about the things that happen in villages.
Yeah, that's true. There's a lot of horrific things that happen in villages. I mean, I've heard some. I've heard some pretty horrific things. I mean, I remember just a few years ago, and things are worse by the way now.
Of course they are. They're worse everywhere. Yeah.
So. And I remember going to I think it was either a relative's funeral, and that there was some suspected serial killer in the village.
Yes.
And
wait, is this the guy who was stabbing people, or is this now somebody else?
This is not even in the book.
It's not even in the book. Okay, this is recent.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this was, and someone had this is not recent, but a few years ago. And I remember thinking, okay, there's probably going to be some news article about this. This was reported by the cop to the cops. Person was arrested, and then they talk about. My uncle was telling me about, kids smoking muape and like raping of women in the village, like hectic things that are happening in this village. And I remember thinking, when I was growing up, it's either those were hidden or they just didn't happen. But what I knew is that I don't think those happened when I was growing up. But I think because so many people have left the village, that young boys have been left to fend for themselves. That's why it's just I mean,
It's what
a few years ago, I read a statistic that says that actually the areas with the most violent crime per square kilometer are villages.
rural areas.
Yeah.
Phew. Okay. Oh, before I go to my last question, ubukele lobo senge umbhede and where is she? I wonder if she's read the book. Because
Oh my
I'm also,
God,
you know what
that
I'm
is
wondering?
funny, yeah.
I'm wondering, Uguti, did she know that you were essentially a virgin before she... Because I would love to find out, Uguti, how did she react reading this book and realizing, oh my God, this guy had been celibate for so long before
so funny.
we dated?
She knew I was
She
celibate.
knew. Oh.
She knew I was celibate. And
Wait, were you celibate or were you a virgin?
I was celibate, not a virgin.
Okay.
And I just and I remember thinking it had been like 8 or 9 years of celibacy.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, okay,
did you remember still how to do it?
well, you don't know. I was embarrassed. I was shy. I was, literally like, after I did it, I literally took a towel and wrapped myself around, called into a ball. What have I done?
You felt dirty.
I felt dirty. I felt like a disappointed God, Literally, that's how
Sometimes
I felt.
you have to eat and sleep. Sometimes with somebody else. Not necessarily in that order. Read the book, guys.
So, I mean, it was, but I don't know. I haven't spoken to in over a decade, so I don't know. And, but she knew. And I remember I'd come to Joburg, because she lived in Joburg and I lived in Cape Town. And I'd come here and she'd come and visit, and I knew she was.
There were so many losses in your life. I know that there was your grandmother and your grandfather and your brother, your dad even, which you, like we've already discussed, you were not even aware that he had passed, and then subsequently your mom and your grandfather's horses.
Yeah.
So, I haven't really had the kind of experience that you've had with loss. The closest person to me that I've ever lost was my best friend who passed away in 2009. Thandeka Shabangu. I still miss her to this day. She was from Mpumalanga. But talk to me about your brother who was in your care when he took his own life. And then we're gonna go into your mom, particularly with focus on how, I think you said something along the lines of, she didn't necessarily die the year after, as she had said, I'm going to die next year. She didn't necessarily die the year after, but her soul had long left her body.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think for the first time I really understood that saying when people say it, because you hear people say like, oh, a parent should never bury their child. You hear it and you kind of understand it intellectually. And I think when I saw how my mother was afterwards, I mean, I saw my mother cry for the first time after the funeral,
You said, leading up to the funeral, before the memorial service and everything like that, she had been so composed.
I was shocked.
And you thought, afterwards, obviously in retrospect, you initially thought, oh, she's so strong.
Yeah.
And then you thinking back and you're like, wait a minute, she was protecting me.
Yes. Yeah, that's what she was doing. I think she was being strong for other people, but not for herself. And I think that being too strong was probably what ate her up.
Mm-hmm.
Because she was, and I'm pretty sure that's not the only thing she was strong for us. And I think that was maybe the final straw where she just couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah.
And
I mean, she had also lost her siblings, some of her siblings, she lost her parents,
her husband,
I keep forgetting about the husband.
Yeah, so because she was, I think they were like 26, 27 when my father passed away. They were very young.
It keeps taking me back to Nomvula because even Uzolani says ukuthi wakhuliswa ubaba wakhe owaswelekelwa esemtsha ngudali wakhe. Exactly what happened to your mom.
So I'll never forget when actually I don't even mention this in the book. I remember my mom saying to me that which is she hates the time of the year, which is around Easter.
Yeah.
It's because that's when my father died. That was when she's shocked that I even know this, that there was boy who was born before me, a year before,
who had passed away,
who had
yeah.
also passed away.
Her brother.
No.
Oh, your
my
brother.
He was
Okay.
older than me. So.
Oh, okay.
Yes, so like he passed away like 3 months after he was born. So around the same time.
So it wasn't the first time your mom had lost a child?
Yeah, it was not the first time my mom had lost a child.
Oh.
So, and she was like, I hate this time of the year. Because,
of what it represents.
Of what it represents. And then, so then my mom, when she said that, when she said after the day of the funeral, after my brother had been buried, when she said, I was so angry at her when she said it. I was like, why would you say that? I
remember you said, why would you say that?
Why would you
Who
say that? Like, I mean, what kind of person? And for me, it was almost like, come on, why would you say this? Wake up from this dream that you're having. And I remember, like, I could see she just became completely different. And
as authors say, the life drained out of her eyes.
It was. Like, and her body, like, changed, transformed over the year. And my mom looked at least 15 years younger than she was. Always. And people were always so shocked to find out how old she was. And then she started looking age. And even the face, the shape of her face, like, transformed. And she was like, I was like, oh my goodness, her face was never like this. And it was almost like, the cheeks were kind of falling down. It was strange. And then, obviously then she got this cancer that I didn't know, and it just grew so rapidly over a month. And I think she knew. I'm pretty sure she knew. She just didn't want to tell anybody. And I think because she just was tired as she felt for my brother when he wrote the note. Because my brother wrote on his suicide note. Well, I'm sorry, the note, but the note that my mother wrote that was read at my brother's funeral, where she says, "The things of rest, my son, the things of this world have exhausted you."
She also felt exhausted by the things of the world.
And so she felt exhausted by the things of this world. And I think she just wanted to go.
She was tired. There's something that really spoke to me personally, where I think, what did your mom say? So I can't remember for the life of me what your mom said. Oh, you said about your mom that you felt like she kind of understood or accepted it gracefully that this had been your brother's decision.
Yeah.
And it was his life. If he felt like it had to end, that was his decision.
Yes. And that for me was like incredibly graceful and heartbreakingly.
It's so heartbreaking.
Accepting, where she basically said that, this is how you felt, and basically we accepted. You were tired, you were in pain, and so you thought this was the only way. So goodbye. And
I feel like we neglect other aspects of our lives at the expense of Njolo. And to honestly, if I'm being honest, we do. Because if you see me go wishing right now, your first thing is not going to be, oh, is it because she's addicted to alcohol? Oh, is it because she lost her dog? Oh, is it because her bank account was wiped clean by scammers? Your immediate thing is Bamlahlile.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, I honestly think we need to be able to accommodate every aspect of our lives, so that other things don't suffer.
Do you know, like, I think one of the biggest problems we have, I mean, to the point you're making is, I think we don't realize how significantly lonelier we've become over time, because we just rely so much on this thing.
Cell phones.
Right? So on cell phones all the time, and people are looking to see, oh, what's on Instagram, what's on TikTok, what's on
the toxic app.
on the toxic app. And then you're there, and then when I'm sitting at a table with other people, I'm always checking my phone. I'm seeing who's saying what to me on WhatsApp or iMessage, rather than being in community. And I think we have really lost that sense of community and closeness to other people. And studies really show that the best, your happiness and how to improve your mental health is to actually spend time with people, family, friends, and that's the best. And we don't do that enough anymore, despite the fact that we have so many more neighbors than we've ever had.
And recreational activities.
Going to groove and just listen to music, go and all of that. And all of that. That is not forming real meaningful bonds.
It's not.
But there's a space for it, guys. I'm for groove for anybody, But
go to groove, guys. But also don't neglect other
aspects that make and form the part of who you are as a person,
as a
social being, because that's what we are, social beings. That's why people go crazy when they're put in solitary confinement, because
that's why solitary confinement was used as one of the most effective methods of torture, actually.
Because you are not being social. You are not with other human beings, and then when we think that when on our phones we are with other human beings there, you are not being other.
But actually, we are no longer even with other human beings. There's a whole thing that people are doing now where they are talking to the AI bot. People are literally, the AI bot is their best friend.
Oh my goodness, that is terrible.
Okay, Khaya, why are your chapters so short?
So
I called him by name.
Yeah, but but okay, there are two reasons. One, so my other book, These Things Going to Happen to Me, I wrote very short chapters. And I had a primary reason and a primary purpose to get more Black people to buy books and read books.
You mentioned that in the beginning of your book that even though we are seeing a surge in the number of Black authors, the number of Black book readers are not following that trend.
Yeah, and so because people aren't, white people still buy more, are still the biggest buyers of books in this country.
Yes.
And we know the reasons,
socioeconomics
and all of that, and more disposable income and so on and so forth.
Yes.
What happened, these things really do happen to me, became relatively successful because because people were shocked. People never picked up a book before. They pick up the book and read it, and they'd be like, send me messages on social media platforms that says, I can't believe that I'm halfway through this book. I've never read a book. I've never bought a book and read it this far. And they're like, oh, I finished it. So many people said that. And so for me, I was like, okay, I do, because I was also thinking about the short attention spans that people have now.
Social media again.
Yes.
Cell phones.
So I was also thinking about that, okay? People shouldn't look at it and say, oh my goodness, this is too daunting.
200 pages for one chapter.
Yeah, for one chapter. So, okay, great. So I was not just writing for people who always write books. I'm also reading for those people who could be potential first-time book buyers and readers. And if this book or any of my books becomes the book that makes them want to read other books, then I'll be satisfied, because I want more Black readers. Thank you so much, Khaya. We will close it off there. Khaya's latest offering, oopsie, the bookmark fell out. Okay, so this is Khaya's new book, Life is Like That. Sometimes you might want to get yourself a copy. If you are somebody who's got a short attention span because you spend so much time on social media, do not worry. The chapters are very concise, very short. Chop, 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 you're done. You're moving on to the next chapter. Thank you so much, Khaya, for joining us. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. And I called my name again. Thank you.